Awesome. I'm so glad to be having this discussion. Welcome, Christina and Kira, to this little collective gain mini episode on the difference between therapy and coaching and when to go to either or both. So if you're tuning in, we have Christina and Kira here, who are both collective gain coaches and who also have degrees, I guess you could say masters and training in therapy as well, although now they spend their time coaching full time. So I thought it'd be really great to have both of these coaches because they understand both sides, the therapy side and the coaching side. So why don't I go ahead and have them introduce themselves before we get into the questions and discussion about the difference between therapy and coaching. Kira, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you so much. It's great to be talking about this topic. It's something that we get asked a lot as coaches. So I'm really excited to share some of the views with you today. I do have a background in clinical therapy. I also have a background in working in corporate America. And that's what led me to becoming a coach 13 years ago. So I've been an executive coach for the last 13 years. And I specialize in transition coaching, which is helping people take on new leadership roles. And I help also people with leadership development, with communication, with emotional intelligence and leadership.
Thank you. Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina, and I do have a background. I'm an occupational therapist by trade. I actually still have my clinical license. I do consulting in regards of clinics or hospital institutions that have questions regarding functionality, things like that. But most of my career path is with coaching, and I've done that for the last 13 years as well. And 10 years ago, I went directly into coaching. And so now I love working with women, but I do work with executives and leaders around leadership, development, personal growth, and also around really feminine embodiment as a lead, and how to lead from that place, as well as intuition and emotional intelligence.
Great. Yes, I know you had the body aspect. You were helping people rehab from like heart surgeries and all of that, and into the whole mental, emotional side of coaching.
Yeah, I was from neuro. So I was mostly into neuro rehabilitation, neuroscience. That's where I started. And then I took all that into how does that apply to how we function? How do we adapt to change? How do we shift? And how do we evolve? And how do we start growing and evolving and adapting to change?
Yes, thank you. That is correct. So forget what I said. That's right. The neurogenic. Okay, so I'm very excited about this topic. I want to start with my belief around this, and that you guys can agree or disagree or elaborate. But when people come to get matched with a coach, they'll ask me, what is the difference, and do you think you can have both? Between therapy and coaching, should you go to both? Should you only pick one? I have a therapist. Should I cancel my therapist because now I'm going to work with a coach? All of those types of questions. And here's my overall belief, because I have been to both therapy and coaching at different times, and I always have a coach now, and I still go back to therapy sometimes for certain issues. And what I say to them is that most people that I know that are high functioning in corporate America, who are typically the people who come to us for coaching, really can benefit from coaching. There are instances where therapy is very helpful, and both are incredibly helpful. Coaching and therapy, there's a place for both. Both are incredibly helpful. It just depends exactly what you're looking for and where you are. And if you want to be someone who's moving forward and has big goals that you're moving towards, you want to focus on that forward momentum, coaching is a great path. If you have things you need to really come to terms with or heal from or connect to or better understand from your past, potentially therapy might be a great path. And you can always do both at the same time if you are someone who's into that. So that's what I say in my belief. And I'll open up to the floor for both of I guess we'll start with you, Christina, like me sharing that, like what, comes to mind for you, and do you agree? What do you agree with or don't disagree or don't agree with that?
No, I actually think it's like really spot on in a lot of ways. The only thing I would say I would add, and how I look at it as well, is a lot to function. And I always say our mental health, our mental well-being can be fluid a lot. It isn't always just like stuck and it's just one thing and it's always that way. We're fluid. And so how are we functioning? And I think now the conversation is evolving from just diagnosis and treatment to more mental well-being, more mental fitness. There's a lot more conversation around emotional and mental well-being. And so what I look at it is it's just functioning. How are we functioning? you can have really high functioning people who are still working, who are still meeting all their goals, but they just feel stuck. They just feel stagnant, or they feel malaise, or they just don't feel motivated, and they can't figure out like what's going on. They're kind of in the same rote every day. And so they're still functioning at a high level. When I look at somebody, when I'm working with somebody, if they start waxing, if they're not, I'm going to give some extremes here, but I think it'll lay the foundation. If they're not functioning, if they're not getting up, or you're finding that you want to sleep a lot more, stay in bed a lot more, you're not meeting some of the goals that you have or your daily functions, it's a good way that your mental well-being is fluctuating a bit and to kind of reevaluate. And again, you could do both of them 100% at the same time, but I think it's a good indicator of how are we functioning. And I think it's a good tool for people if they're contemplating where am I at, is to kind of tune in their actual daily function. If they're still going to work and still having their life, it's a good time that they might just need some coaching, and that they're just out of alignment, or they're just stuck and they need to evolve and grow and change, and they just need a shift, because we all are like that, especially after the past couple of years. Holy schmoly, like we're just not meant to be in the environments and the level of constant stress that we've been in. So I look at it as more a function of like, how are we functioning, and and definitely looking at simultaneously, because I think therapy and coaching simultaneously is really powerful. So those are my thoughts on it right now.
How about you, Kira?
I think both of you have amazing points about the differences. I think it's really having the person who's trying to make the choice think about where they're at and what they think is going to be most helpful for them in order to move forward. I mean, when we think about therapy, it's typically beneficial. And as Christina said, if you're in this place where you're a little bit stuck and you're not functioning as high a level as you want to be, it's typically used for people who are experiencing levels of anxiety and depression, or post-traumatic stress, or, trying to deal with maybe grief or loss, or an illness. So there are definitely uses for and great applications for going to see a therapist to be addressing some of those types of areas of, whether you want to call it mental illness, or having some kind of moments where you need that type of support. I think from a coaching standpoint, and Lizzie, you had mentioned this as well, there is almost a present future focus on it, whereas therapy tends to be a little bit more focused on understanding our past, our beliefs, our emotions, and our situations, whether it's, grief or illness or something like that, in order to help us find some coping strategies to move forward. And then when we think about coaching, it's really, okay, what are our goals? What do we want to be focusing on? And what are the steps we can take to help meet them? So it's a different set of skills that therapists bring to the table than coaches. And I think the other thing that we would be remiss if we didn't mention is the fact that there's a certain education element, there's a certain licensing element for being a therapist. So whether you're a psychologist, a therapist, a counselor, occupational therapist, there's a certain process and education that you go through, and certain techniques that are part of that experience. And also, obviously, when we think about it as a medical condition, there's insurance that tends to cover it. And then we have coaching, which is obviously lots of techniques and certifications and ways that people become effective coaches. But typically it's either the person paying for it themselves or the company's paying for it. So there's some pretty kind of factual, logistical differences there that I think we need to be bringing into the conversation too.
Absolutely. And I think therapy, especially when it's covered by insurance and you might only have a $20 copay, if your company's not going to pay for coaching, or if you do not want to or can't pay, usually coaching's $200 at minimum an hour, right? Executive coaching more, $350 or more per session, can be very costly. And so therapy, I think speaking with your therapist, but wanting to be, thinking about the future and setting goals is absolutely something you can do, right? Directing that conversation, that relationship. but coaches have a very specific skill set and are trained to help people get clarity in the present moment and be in an empowered version of themselves moving forward in alignment with who they are, right? It's that finding that thread of alignment within somebody. So I, just to share an example to help people who are listening, sorry, the dog is going nuts, needs to come in. So I'm just going to wheel myself back and open the door. So, like what I recently, I'm trying to think of like when I went to therapy. So, you know, very specific feelings where you just, it's like highly emotional, high emotional churn, can't sleep, feeling very upset, feeling almost post-traumatic or trauma symptoms of just in my body, in my mind, anxiety, heart racing, thoughts racing about a specific situation that happened in my life. That was, I was getting like flashes back of this experience that I just felt like, wow, like I need help processing this. And then I went to therapy and I, you know, went 3 or 4 times and I felt like, great, I got through that. I got clarity and I'm moving forward. And that was, wow, I was still doing coaching, but that to me was like a sign that this is not something my coach is going to help me with. This is something I really want to talk to a therapist about, because the emotions, I think Kira used the word, the emotions, and Christina, the mental well-being, like I could tell I was suffering in a way that was abnormal, that was more than just normal stress. Like, what are signs people should look for to know? Because there are times people do coaching, right? And as coaches will say like, hey, I think you actually need therapy, right? So what are some of the signs for people to know when to go to therapy versus coaching?
You want to take that, Christina? You look like you're about to talk.
Sure. Sure. Actually, Lizzie, I think what you hit the nail on the head in a lot of ways is like that high emotion. Like, are we suffering? Are we struggling? I think that's a conversation that most people don't even understand. I think right now, especially these past couple of years, there's a lot of struggle. And if we're so used to willpower and just muster through it and just power your way through it, I think we don't have the rhetoric and the self-awareness or information to even understand that that's where therapy really could come in. I think a lot of people are used to just running at that, and there's so much stigma around it that I'll be fine, I'll figure it out. And they just keep going and keep going. But when we have that high emotional response, when we are struggling like emotionally and you're feeling like what you said, like situational, you're like, yeah, I have goals, but there's something here, or past trauma or an experience, if it keeps coming up or you're seeing it play out over and over again, those are times to go to therapy to actually talk about it, because there's information, there's help, there are tools that you can do to stop that a loop, but also heal to move forward so you can function at a higher capacity, you can go into goals, you can set them. And so I think that like that healing, that processing, the talking, I mean, there's different kinds of therapy, but when we're having that place of, I'll call it trigger, or we're not doing well, and if we find I can just figure it out, or I just need to muster through it, I just need to power, I think that's a really good indicator for ourselves to start having a different conversation. Why am I just trying to power through it? Like, what's really going on? Am I mentally struggling? And to go, and that's a good indicator of like, actually, I might need more support than if you are going to coaching, I might need support, which is how you realize, Lizzie, which is great, because I think those signs are what we preemptively need to start having conversations with ourselves, because that is what most people just lump into one category. Oh, it's just stress. Or they dismiss it because it is painful. Because we don't want to have pain, we want to avoid it. And so we tend to either ignore it or shove it aside, which is why our nervous systems and our bodies, they hold on to it. Whether we want to deal with it or not, we still hold on to it. It lives in our body, it lives in our cellular membrane, it lives in our nervous system, it's still there. And so being able to have like, okay, I can ignore it for so long, but the reality is it's still going to be there. When it keeps coming up, it's also a time to look at like, hey, I might need more support than the tools that I have or my coach has.
So do you have anything to add, Kira?
I think Christina covered it perfectly. I would just say one thing to anyone who's watching and trying to make the decision about whether to see a therapist, if you're asking the question, that's probably an indicator that it might be beneficial for you. And then I will also say something that I tell my clients a lot. If you keep asking yourself the same question, you actually do know the answer. And it's just the acceptance of the answer and taking the steps you need to help yourself. And the last thing I will say is that if you are asking the question and you haven't taken the steps, my encouragement to you is you deserve it. And you deserve to be providing that support for yourself. And it's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. It's actually a sign of strength.
It's highly efficient and effective. Yeah, go ahead, Christina. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
I'm off mute now. No, Kara brought up a really good point. And I also think because where we are right now, coaching is a buzzword. Coaching feels good and supportive and like we're moving forward and nothing's wrong with us. And I feel like what she just said, if we're having that question over and over again, it's probably indicated that therapy is a really good place to start. And to ask ourselves, are we going to coaching because it just feels less like something's wrong with me? And that's where we have a lot of growth. We can actually soften that and change that. And I feel like that's the movement that we're going right now, is realizing exactly what Kara just said, is like it's actually a sign of strength to know like, hey, I'm not doing well. I actually need to go look at this and to heal it, because then after that, that's a good indicator of when to go to coaching. So I feel like that, just knowing of our own biases and our own stigmas around mental health services, mental health tools, therapy in general, because coaching can look really fancy and like, I'm good, I'm just gonna try to meet my goals, when actually therapy is where we need to start.
And I will say that most people I speak with, and that again is people who come to Collective Gain, usually they're in some sort of corporate job. They are, functioning well enough to be going to a job and getting a paycheck and showing up and on all those things, able to do that. 99.9% of the time, the coach is exactly what they need. And it's not therapy, actually. And oftentimes they've been going to therapy and they realize I've been going to therapy for 4 years and I'm not really the person I want to be. And I'm like, well, let's try coaching. And in like 3 to 6 months, they're where they want to be. And that's not a knock on therapy. It's just a different tool, a different application, a different, mindset, different training, all of those things. And so for people listening, I have felt before dead inside. I have felt completely apathetic. I have felt numb. I have felt angry. I have felt scared, fearful. All of those things, when I went to coaching, I was able to move forward, because it was all of those symptoms were a sign of misalignment, of not listening to myself, of feeling trapped, of feeling not knowing who I was, about not being excited about what was next, feeling stuck. So because you're not feeling good inside does not mean I must go to therapy. It's more of, and I think just to call out, when you have emotional triggers that actually cause, in my opinion, physiological responses, that the trauma is deep, that the experience was really hard and painful, the racing thoughts, the higher heartbeat, the can't sleep, the stop eating, don't want to get out of bed, like all of these things to me are bigger symbols, like signs that like therapy is definitely the way to go. And when I was really unhappy at work, I didn't have that, but I did have the overall malaise and numbness and blah and disengagement, right? It was different. And that was perfect place for me to go to coaching. So are there any other big questions? I mean, maybe just like your last kind of recommendation, if you will, or anything you want to say about coaching or therapy, or when to know, or the difference, anything you feel like we need to cover that we haven't.
Well, I think in terms of, because I'm mostly working in companies, actually, I'm only working in companies as an executive coach. So one of the things I would say to people who think that they would benefit from working with a coach, if they're wanting to refine their skills, if they're wanting to have a pathway towards their career goals, if they want to be figuring out better ways to improve performance for them and people on their team, to really advocate for themselves with their leadership and advocate with anyone who would be contributing to the decision-making process. Because we know, all of us obviously know it works. We've seen amazing transformations of people and what can happen in terms of their daily satisfaction and confidence level through this process. So I would just say, if it's something that you're interested in, learn more about it, advocate for yourself to be getting the resources that are necessary, and call Lizzie, because she's great at helping you figure it out what you need.
Yes, I'm all of that. I'm 100% behind. I actually would just only add a little bit more to that is also company or on our own. We all need support. As when we're young, we get coaches if we want to play an instrument, if we want to go be on a team, we get coaches, we get people who will see our greatness and allow us to keep moving forward. So I believe we're all worth that, no matter where we are in that. And I find that a lot of people are overwhelmed. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of ways to go, but how do you start? I would also say, as much as there are credentials, there are tools, there are special trainings for therapy, there are for coaches as well. So obviously, Lizzie, what you've done is so amazing. Like, you have done all that hard work so people can just come to your service and you can have a collective of coaches who meet qualifications. If you're not going through something like that, make sure that you are having people who are trained, because again, there are a lot of noise out there that your stuff comes up with coaching. It's supposed to. That's kind of what it's all about, is to have it come up so you can keep moving forward. And you want people at the other end to have that empathy, to have the tools and the training to guide you. I always say, like, whoever's at the other end needs to know more than you, not necessarily about what your profession or what your actual situation is, but how to get you to the other side. And so I also will just add that of really just knowing when you're looking is like those can be some parameters, the tuning inward of making sure they're having tools to actually support you.
Yes,
but
thank
you're worth
you.
it.
Yeah. And, people don't realize, coaching isn't like a licensed experience, but, all the coaches on Collective Gain, all of us have some sort of coaching certification, or we have coaching courses we've taken, or specific targeted certificates we've gotten, plus hours, hundreds of hours of paid experience coaching people. And one of the biggest things is to always make sure when you're looking for a coach, and probably this applies to a therapist as well, is like, do they have a coach? Have they done the deep work themselves? And anybody who says, I want to become a coach, I'm like, great, first step, hire a coach. So don't go to coaching school, hire a coach, go through a 6-month coaching journey. And if you liked what you experienced, then go to coaching school. And so every therapist I know, one of my bestest friends is a therapist, and she has therapists, right? Like, they know the process works. And yes, I can match you. That is one of my genius talents, is matching people with support. I always, want to have my little RX prescription for personal development. And when you come, I'm like, okay, I have this coach for you. How about this specialist? Let's get you an astro session. And there's all these things that come up that I can help you with. So the Collective Gain community is here for you. We have an incredible team with all sorts of different backgrounds and certifications, over 60 plus different types of certifications, actually. So everything from emotional intelligence, like Kira was talking about, with like soul alignment and body work, which Christina does, as well as how to speak in public, how to introduce yourself, resume work, all of that. So we run the full gamut. So I hope this was helpful for you to decide if coaching and or therapy is something you want to move forward with. If you have any questions at all, you can reach out to talk@collectivegain.com or follow us on Instagram, and you can text me via the link in the profile. My phone number is there. You can go ahead and text me and I'll answer right away. And if you still aren't sure, book a 30-minute session with me and I will help you understand what the best way forward is for you. Thank you both so much for joining. I very much appreciate you both here. And I hope that my intention is this helps many people get the support they need.
Thank you.
Take care.